Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome and good afternoon to all of you. My name is Onica Makwakwa. I am the Africa coordinator for the Alliance for Affordable Internet. I am joined here today by my colleague, Teddy Woodhouse, who is the research manager at Web Foundation. Some of you may know Teddy. He's had a long history of working on this report with A4AI. I'm gonna just ask each of you to please rename your name on the webinar so that we have your name, and in brackets just put the name of the organization if you are able to. I know some of you are joining from a mobile. I'm going to also request that we all please mute our lines so that we can make it easier for Teddy to hear all of us. Kindly note that this session is actually being recorded and the recording will be shared afterwards. Teddy, welcome. You are not new to this group. Please take it over.
Perfect. Thank you, Onica. And hi, everyone. Just gonna mute. There we go. Reduce the the noise feedback. Hi, everyone. As my colleague said, I'm Teddy Woodhouse. I'm a researcher here at the Alliance for Affordable Internet and one of the lead authors of this year's Affordability Report. What I'll do is I'll give a quick run through some of the main findings of this report and give some highlights, particularly from the region across Africa, to this year's report, and some of the countries that have been some of the biggest movers and some of the most promising stories as well. And then, yeah, we'll open it up to have a nice kind of open conversation. So please, as you feel free, as questions kind of emerge for you, do put them in the chat box, and we'll get to them at the end. As you know, the Affordability Report is published every year. This year is another update of the Affordability Drivers Index, which is a core part of the Affordability Report, which summarizes the broadband policy environment of this year. It's now 72 low and middle income countries. We added an additional 10 countries this year's report across the globe. Most interestingly, we added our first 2 countries to the Pacific region. But what I'll do is I'll focus on the region mostly in this presentation, but there will be a few global trends as well that we talk about. My presentation will kind of focus on 4 particular areas. What's the current situation right now, kind of why we're here, what needs to change, and that'll get into the policy recommendations we have within the report, learnings from evidence, and that'll go into some of the case studies that we have in the report or in other A4AI resources that kind of talk about the importance of this year's theme and the policy issue it talks about. And the last part, translating evidence to action. On that part, I'll keep quite open-ended to suggest some further resources from A4AI, but really interested in getting your perspectives as well and how we collectively can take this report and apply it into practice in various contexts in different countries to motivate broadband policy change to make internet prices more affordable for everyone. But to kick off, I wanted to focus on 3 numbers that were pretty, stark summaries of this year in review. It's been quite a wild year for all of us. I think one of the most pressing numbers for me is that middle one of 1.3 billion learners, which is the estimate from UNESCO of the number of learners who've been affected by school or university closures. And in this, so many of these people had to move online to continue their education. And so in many ways, the digital divide that still exists in the world became an educational divide as well. And so it just increases the pressure on all of us to ensure that internet access does not become kind of a new distinguisher between the haves and have-nots, which is why we keep in mind that bottom number, which is the 51% of individuals who do have internet access, but also the flip side of the 49% of individuals who don't have access right now, and what we can do to better connect those individuals and make the internet more meaningful and more ubiquitous in everyone's life. And that top number, just to summarize as well, kind of our unique perspective as A4AI of 150 million people are estimated by the World Bank to be pushed into extreme poverty by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so for these people in particular, but for the entire globe, the affordability of internet is a pressing issue because what a consumer is going to have to pay to remain connected can mean the difference between whether they're actually able to use the lifeline that internet access increasingly means, or if it's just going to be an unaffordable luxury that only a select few are able to use. We have a vision for that first world where everyone's able to use it, but we still have a lot of action to get there. This is a quick summary of across Africa, what the picture of affordability looks like right now. And so what you'll see is a color-coded map here of countries, of how many gigabytes a consumer is able to purchase for 2% of the average monthly income in that country. And so as you may know, A4I has the affordability standard, which is built around 1 for 2. That is to say that we think that a consumer should be able to get at least 1 gigabyte of data for no more than 2% of their average monthly income. And so you'll see here the countries that meet that threshold are in green, and the countries that aren't quite there yet are in orange. And unfortunately, across the region, there are a number of countries that still remain in that dark orange, where internet prices are simply unaffordable for the vast majority of users. And and driving down the price of internet is a really pressing issue across the continent that we want to dig into in this presentation and hopefully continue the conversation on over the next few years. One kind of global trend that we're optimistic about, though, is that across the globe, and this is a simple summary chart from the 52 countries that have always been present in our research, so from the very beginning in 2014 up to present day, in terms of both measuring the price of internet, of mobile broadband and of their policy environment through the Affordability Drivers Index. Among those 52 countries, the price of 1 gigabyte of mobile broadband has consistently gone down and continues to go down, which is quite optimistic. And some of the biggest changes and biggest price falling or biggest reductions in prices are happening in low income countries where the need is greatest for policy change and for for internet prices to fall, which is quite heartening news for us that we're on the right path. But, and here's the slight sour note, is that green line, which is still positive and reflects the Affordability Drivers Index scores on average of countries and tries to put a quantitative measure to broadband policy environments. Those environments are improving, but they're not improving as fast as we wish they would. So in many ways, across all 3 regions we study, so that's Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia Pacific, we hope to see policy change come out of this report and continue to be pursued in the vision of more affordable internet for everyone. But overall, optimistically, things are in the right trajectory, which gives us good confidence, particularly noting as well the relationship of the 2 factors. This is a chart that we do with every report, which takes the latest available affordability data, which is the x-axis, so on the bottom part, across the horizontal part, plus the Affordability Drivers Index this has the 72 countries in this year's report, comparing how the 2 countries perform in relation to each other. And so you'll see quite a wide spread according to the affordability of 1 gigabyte of mobile broadband. But generally, the trend continues to hold that countries that are performing higher on the Affordability Drivers Index are also seeing greater affordability and lower internet prices for consumers at the end. And just to also say that all of this progress is possible in part, all of this progress also contributes to other factors such as meaningful connectivity. A4I this year introduced the 4 meaningful connectivity targets, which talks about, in addition to affordability, kind of the quality of internet access as well, and making sure that internet access is something that is meaningful for users and that is able to sustain kind of a life online. And for us, we have 4 targets that we're really encouraging as part of this work around 4G mobile connections, smartphone ownership, access to an unlimited broadband point, typically at home, work, or a place of study, and also daily internet use to make sure that this tool is actually relevant and useful for people. And so many of these policy issues, while we focus on affordability in this report, and I will in this presentation, also relate and contribute positively to some of these other aspects of internet access and making it more meaningful for users as well. So to the Affordability Report and to the Affordability Drivers Index, here is a regional top 10. You'll see on the left side in orange, it's all countries across the continent that are included in the index and where they fit. And then on the right, the green chart is reserved for countries that fit into the least developed countries, which is that UN classification. Because we do see that income is quite an influential factor in terms of how a country is performing. So it's good for us to cluster and understand countries and kind of peer groups in that context. A lot of countries that you see here that are making particularly positive gains, such as Botswana and Senegal, are moving because of their national broadband plans, which is quite coincidental and favorable for us because that is this year's report focusing on national broadband plans and their capacity to facilitate broader policy change, not just in setting a vision, but also kind of the cascading consequences for many of the other issues that are talked about in the Affordability Report and in the Affordability Drivers Index, such as spectrum management or rights of way or regulatory enforcement and the regulatory environment overall. And that relationship came into the data as well this year. So what you'll see here is you'll see countries with their ADI score, so their index score overall on the bottom, and then how high they are is relative to their evaluative score of their national broadband plan in effect as we assessed it, which fits on a 11-point scale from 0 to 10. And there was a really good and promising relationship. So you'll see here that there's kind of a trend line that suggests that as countries have better national broadband plans in place, they also are performing more, they're performing better on the Affordability Drivers Index, which in some ways does make sense. For full disclosure, this score of a national broadband plan is one of the indicators in the Affordability Drivers Index, but it's also relating to many of the other scores and has an influential impact there that we think kind of leads it to be quite important overall for the broadband policy environment in a country. And a lot of the ways that we're seeing broadband plans be particularly influential and be effective in bringing down internet prices and making it more affordable is through what they do for various stakeholders in the sector. And so here we summarize it into kind of 3 broad clusters. So for the public sector, national broadband plans make public spending smarter. And that's to say that it makes investments a little bit more effective. It adds clarity around what is going to be invested by the public sector, what is potentially the government's role in building out infrastructure. And that's both kind of in a positive and negative sense of where the boundary sits of what remains beyond the boundary of a public sector, but also what needs to be advanced, what potentially needs kind of intervention from the public sector to ensure that the business case is viable for internet access to be provided to everyone. So smart spending through national broadband plans and the clarity of that a good plan can provide also contributes into market stability for private sector actors. So national broadband plans in their best sense typically provide a long-term vision of 5 to 7 years in terms of what's the arc of progression for the broadband policy environment for a country in the near future. That stability, that forward thinking can provide a lot of certainty that is quite valuable for facilitating private investment into infrastructure development and continuing to improve the capacity of a network to provide internet services. So that certainty is quite important, not just for public sector, but also private sector. And then the last part, a good national broadband plan creates a lot of accountability. And that can affect the relationship between private and public sector, but also the relationship and the role of civil society in broadband policy debates. Through a national broadband plan that's transparent and has clear targets, you can have a voice and a space for civil society that's able to kind of keep both public sector and private sector to task in terms of continuing to attain the goals that have been set out in the vision of a national broadband plan, and kind of making sure that each year or kind of every other year through the progression of a plan that progress is continually being made and there's not any shortcomings, or where shortcomings are emerging, that those are addressed and there's kind of tweaks and changes and new implementations that continue to keep the trajectory on the right path. So in terms of looking at national broadband plans, in this year's report, so there's the 72 countries, and we cataloged specifically this year the national broadband plans of 65 countries. So you'll see in the report, there's a nice spreadsheet database that has a link to the plan if it's publicly available, but also some summary information around if it's setting targets around issues such as 4G, rural access, fixed access, the affordability of data, or the affordability of devices as well. And so in that sense, and in focusing on these national broadband plans, we are trying to understand what makes plans particularly effective or less effective. Where do we see the jump from a pretty document to implementation and success for a country in terms of lower internet prices? And for us, there were 3 things that were quite important here. The first one was focused on the inputs that were coming into a report, particularly from a diverse and representative set of players. And so it's thinking about including private sector, public sector, and civil society in open consultations, and also not necessarily considering each of these three groups as monolithic institutions. For public sector, many of these issues are no longer just relevant to a communications ministry. They're just as relevant to education, to health, to other positive outcomes that governments are trying to pursue. And so in many ways, it's quite important to have kind of a cross-sectoral involvement from the public sector. Also, the private sector, network operators are a classic example of key stakeholders in this process, but there will be other individuals and other companies who will be interested in the state of the digital economy and greater access for everyone. That's quite important to include in a broadband plan and the vision overall for country. And then for civil society, of course, there's quite a diverse range of voices that fit within the brand of civil society. It can include everyone from women's groups to library associations to municipal governments in some instances as well, and kind of municipal groups as well, that were important stakeholders in the process of a number of countries. And so it's good to kind of draw from as many parts of a national context as possible, so you can benefit from the diversity of those voices and the diversity of experiences in informing the quality of a plan. In informing a plan, that plan should come to a set of clear targets, and this is the second policy recommendation, that address the most critical gaps in a country's context. So they're context specific and context responsive, but they also have clear measurement and a time limit. And these are the two aspects that we really, where we determine the difference between what's an aspiration and what's a target. A target has a time limit that says in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years, we're going to do X. And it has to be a means of measurement. So it can be, 80% of rural areas have coverage, as an example, rather than just saying we want more people in rural areas to have coverage. Because that tangibility and that certainty are essential to facilitating the third policy recommendation, which focuses on funding commitments and also a stated plan for transparent review and assessment. So without those targets, it's quite difficult to have the robust process of review and transparency and accountability that can be facilitated with targets. So without them, it's quite much more difficult to kind of keep the pressure on through the years and through the progression of a national broadband plan's validity without them. And so that's why it's quite important to have the targets in place. And then the third part, it's really focusing on the funding commitments, so that when it's targets in place, it's then, okay, what's the funding commitment? What's the funding gap that needs to be covered to make this a reality? And so that's an essential part of transitioning a plan from a nice document to impact for consumers. It can be through the form of a universal service fund or through other investment mechanisms or approaches, depending on a country's context and what seems to be the most pressing issue or most valuable intervention in that context. But funding is a core part of ensuring that a national broadband plan isn't considered an endpoint, even though it's the product of a number of months of consultations. But it's actually the start of a process that is kind of the then implementation of that plan and ensuring that what has been promised is actually delivered. So this year's report focuses on those three aspects, and to ground it a bit and add a little bit more detail, I wanted to add in a few regional case studies from across the continent that kind of illustrate good examples of each of those three policy recommendations, and also a fourth example of kind of a good broadband plan overall. And so that good broadband plan overall is the case study of Rwanda, which as a low-income country, typically countries in that group have a harder time performing higher on the Affordability Drivers Index, typically have more expensive internet prices relative to the amount of income that it's going to cost someone to buy, for example, that 1 gigabyte of mobile broadband. But we've seen a lot of progress in Rwanda over the past few years, particularly with it kind of outpacing some of its neighbors in East Africa in terms of what that 1 gigabyte of mobile broadband means relative to someone's income. And that comes out of the benefit of a really strong broadband planning process that has then facilitated into further interventions across the sector that have kind of trickled down into more affordable internet prices for everyone. Back to those 3 policy recommendations, here are 3 instances across the continent of good practices around open consultations, clear targets, and committed funding. So in open consultations, if you go to the good practices database on the A4A website, there is actually a case study about Botswana's practice around being consultative and being an open institution through its regulatory authority. And a lot of this can be done through kind of making meetings transparent and open to the public, but also having an opportunity for commenting process that's available to anyone, no matter their background or kind of stakeholder group. So that's one good example of the openness and how it can kind of contribute to a positive broadband policy environment. In clear targets, there's a new plan that was implemented in Nigeria just this year. And so in many ways, Nigeria is a very interesting country because its national broadband plan has met all of these targets at the document level. So in terms of what the national broadband plan says it's going to do, it has quite fortuitously met many of the expectations of what we recommend as good practices here. In particular, the clear targets. They have clear targets across all 5 of those thematic areas that I mentioned earlier. And so it'll be interesting to see over the next few years to ensure that what we're talking about here, this is going to be a great case study of ensuring that the recommendations here are valid and that the implementation detail is successful here. But we have a lot of optimism in the case of Nigeria because of the strength of the plan and because of the strength of the targets here that really provide a robust basis for accountability and for transparency in terms of progression over the next few years in the country's instance. And then the last one I wanted to mention is committed funding. In Senegal, there's been a lot of good progress in relation to the National Broadband Plan in terms of backhaul development and kind of bringing internet access further into the country. So if you know the geography of Senegal, there's quite a lot of population density relative to Dakar, which is a city on the western coast of the country, but it's also building that backhaul into other parts of the country and providing better infrastructure for better access for people throughout the country, no matter where they are geographically, including rural areas. And we're seeing a lot of good practice there in Senegal around that kind of that implementation detail and seeing the government really committing to what it said it was going to commit in the National Broadband Plan, which came into effect in 2018, I believe. So those are 4 examples across the continent of kind of good practices, and happy to kind of discuss them further or kind of think about other countries in the open discussion as well. But I wanted to quickly plug as well kind of the breadth of resources that are available relative to the Affordability Report. This has just been kind of a quick summary presentation, about 20 minutes of some of the key findings, but there's so much more to the report. In particular, if you want to dig into any granular aspects of the data, there is the Data Explorer. You see a screenshot of it here on the front, where you can kind of click onto a country and see how it performs on each of these individual indicators, not just about its national broadband plan, but also its competition enforcement, its spectrum policy, its universal service fund, other aspects like that, and how they all relate into each other. And also there's kind of other resources on the Affordability Report page in general, including we'll have regional and country snapshots available early next year, but you can also see back editions of those reports as well. And as I mentioned, there is the good practices database on the A4A website as well, which relates to a number of the good case studies that you see here in this report. So for example, Botswana and Rwanda were both countries that are mentioned there. So yeah, that gives a quick whirlwind summary of the Affordability Report. I can see in the chat there's been quite a lot of activity and some questions. So looking forward to that. And I will hand back over to Onica for now.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Teddy, for that. And so we are going to quickly go into questions because unfortunately we have very limited time for this session. Please continue to send your questions to the chat and we will take them on from there. And then some of you, I may just ask you to come on camera and ask the questions yourselves. I am going to start with Olu from USAID. Olu, are you able to switch yourself on and ask your question?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Teddy. I mean, this is a very good presentation. I was just trying to figure out, based on your experience in Sub-Saharan Africa, the countries with good broadband plans and been able to effectively implement this in the last couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So I would say kind of a couple of the really good practices were the ones I mentioned in the report of Rwanda and Botswana, and there's more detail in the report itself of kind of how those plans are coming out and really affecting the sector. But broadly, it's that key measurement that we were following is, okay, so what's the price of 1 gigabyte of mobile broadband relative to what it was 5 years ago? And in many cases, in Rwanda, for example, it dropped from, I think, over 20% to now. It's one of the countries that is closest to being one of the low-income countries that is closest to finally meeting the 1 for 2 affordability target, which is quite promising. So it's made a lot of progress over the past 5 years. I think a counterexample of where things have kind of stalled out and where there needs to be kind of motivation for greater change that happens in South Africa. As a key example, the SA Connect National Broadband Plan is unfortunately starting to show a bit of its age. And it would be really good to kind of kickstart and see a new process there to really set new ambitious targets that could drive the sector forward and kind of motivate a bit of change there. So I think you can see kind of both the good and bad in terms of the consequences of a national broadband plan, how it's affecting other things in the sector, and how it can be quite an influential policy tool to motivate broadband policy change in a country.
Actually, coincidentally that you mentioned SA Connect from South Africa, actually we have Charlie Lewis is on here, and he actually made a comment with regards to how the South African National Broadband Policy actually ticks all 3 of the boxes of those 3 items that you mentioned with consultation, allocation of resources and all of that. Perhaps, Charlie, you would like to come forth. Are you able to switch on and either ask a question or provide comment, insight with regards to SA Connect and the plan for South Africa?
Okay, I wasn't actually planning to speak, but I'm happy to do that. And you and I have interacted on SA Connect, I think, in another platform. And it's curious to me. I mean, SA Connect went through, it's the oldest plan, as I think you've elsewhere said. It went through a process where it was extensively consulted. It does set a number of specific targets. I'm not going to come back to those in a moment. And it was within the budget of the department for a number of years. And yet it's, in a sense, has really gone has not been as successful as it might have been, and possibly for a variety of reasons. I mean, they report regularly to Parliament on the progress, or rather the lack of progress thereof. And I think it might be useful for a bit of an interrogation into exactly what went wrong, because that kind of analysis may well help us with examples like the case of Nigeria you referred to, which also ticks all the boxes. And how do we make sure that Nigeria's broadband plan doesn't land up in the same place as SA Connect? I think, and just off the top of my head, I think a couple of problems with SA Connect, apart from the fact that it wasn't updated since it was originally published, but there was a lack of political will and political commitment. A National Broadband Commission was established and then more or less abandoned by the ministry. And gradually the people on that commission resigned one by one. One of them is in the audience currently, Alison Gilwald, and she may have some views on that as well. So I think it founded partly from a lack of political commitment. I think also, and this goes to the point around targets, I think the targets were impossible. They set impossibly optimistic targets. And despite having timeframes to them, they were also far too high level. Too many of the targets were set at a national level. 50% of the population, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, will have access to broadband at 10 megabits a second by 2020, for example. Now, in a national context like South Africa, those kind of things don't work. So I think much more nuanced and precise targets might have been useful. But that's just a couple of initial thoughts from me. Alison may well be able to, and I'm sure will be able to add. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that, Charlie. I think especially that big one that you dropped there around political will, because we seem to always dance around this issue and importance of political will in some of these, advancing this agenda as well. Actually, Alison has made some comments in the chat with regards to SA Connect specifically, but I'd love to bring her on because she also, prior to that, had some very specific questions with regards to whether these broadband plans really can produce positive internet outcomes. Alison, are you in a position to at least unmute?
Thank you very much, Onica. I was also doing a number of things, so planning not to, but of course got tied into the conversation. Thank you so much for the report and for the presentation, Teddy, which was very interesting. I suppose I was just commenting on the methodology really, and the use of broadband plans as the measure for positive outcomes. And if we're talking about, I'm talking about positive policy outcomes. So meaningful, affordable internet, or however you've described it. And I think, our data, which sadly, wasn't updated in the 2020 wave with COVID and a number of other things, really demonstrates that the main correlation between internet penetration or meaningful, affordable access and internet is really GDP per capita. And there are sort of, little anomalies here and there, but this is really the driver, the sort of levels of economic development of countries. And I think that's also really demonstrated in the fact that, many countries have very strong supply side measures. Rwanda, Botswana, the countries that you've mentioned, have strong measures, Senegal, and yet we don't really see the same positive outputs. So we've got a country like Rwanda, very strong supply side policies, that in our 2018 survey had less than 10% internet penetration, the lowest internet penetration of all the countries that we reviewed. And I should say the biggest gender gap, a 60% gender gap, only matched by large populous East Asian countries, despite positive gender policy measures. So the real challenges are actually on the demand side. These are human development challenges. Many of these countries, Rwanda, South Africa, 99%, Rwanda, 95% broadband penetration, and yet these tiny uptakes, largely because of these kind of demand side constraints that people have, and certainly to use the internet more meaningfully once we start looking at digital economy and these kinds of things. So, I think obviously having a good broadband plan is a kind of necessary condition, but it's certainly not a sufficient condition. And the fact that the plans are used as the measure and not the implementation of the plans is obviously a massive challenge for us. So, I think in some senses, Charlie's been quite polite. I mean, we've got the fabulous SA Connect. It was in the Broadband Commission, as identified as a good example, but actually very, very little. The whole conceptualization of it has not been implemented in that way. A whole lot of things have been implemented in the name of SA Connect, reported to Parliament, as Charlie says, etc. But actually the plan was not implemented as per the consultation and policy process at all. And unlike Charlie, I actually think the figures for South Africa, the targets for South Africa, which were very consulted on, were aspirational, but they certainly, some of them certainly were achievable. The connecting of all public buildings with Wi-Fi, connection of broadband and Wi-Fi to all these buildings, these kinds of things were really possible if we'd prioritized them. So, I just think it wasn't implemented properly. We could have met some of those targets, and we could have had far more positive outcomes in terms of affordable access to the internet.
Great, thank you very much for that. I'm going to ask Terry, because I think you raised some really important points that I know have come up even with previous reports on the ADI. So Terry, would you like to make a comment, especially in response to Alison's comments?
Yeah, I guess just to thank them both, both Charlie and Alison, for their comments. It's good to have their feedback and their perspective as well on kind of adding complexity to the story in South Africa. And yeah, to Alison's point, there is a brutality to how influential GDP per capita is in terms of how countries are performing. And that even happens in the Affordability Drivers Index as a policy tool itself. Is generally wealthier countries are performing better. Yeah, it's a huge challenge because it affects then many other issues that kind of cascade into government capacity and ability to enforce things independently and have kind of the resources to back themselves up. And so in many ways, this is trying to thread the needle, because there are many cases in which it is influential, but wanting to see some optimism in terms of ways of not necessarily seeing it as being deterministic, that simply your income is what will say what will be. Because we are seeing some other instances that can be particularly positive to pull out of the region of Africa, I would say, in Asia Pacific in particular. And that's why we focused on national broadband plans in part this year, is there were so many positive stories coming from that region in terms of national broadband plans really pushing countries forward and being very, very influential in having specifically the digital aspect of a country move things forward. And so Nepal is an example in that country, which is again another low-income country, but because of its success in terms of its national broadband plan, it is starting to see many of the positive indicators that we want to, encouraging countries along in terms of the affordability of its network. And so, yeah, I wanting to kind of see both parts of it as part of the solution here, part of what needs to be studied, and then also your last point around demand side interventions is a very worthy point, because it's something that the Affordability Drivers Index as a policy tool doesn't talk about as much as even I wish it does. So that's something that we're going to be looking at as A4AI in the near future, on ways we can think about demand side interventions, and how we kind of can quantify them, how we can study them a bit better and bring it into the equation as well. Because I think you're right, it's going to be both parts, the supply side and demand side, that really need to have positive change to motivate things and to break that straitjacket of income determining outcomes. So yeah, thank you there.
Great. Thanks, Teddy, and thanks everyone for participating. We have one other comment, question from Tahir. I'm not sure if you're still here, Tahir Kasim, on community networks. Are you able to unmute, or should I read your question?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon. Okay, Teddy, as my concern is, actually, don't you think that internet connectivity could be better achieved with a push towards as community networks, rather than expecting the governments and telcos to do the work? Thank you.
Teddy, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Just finding the unmute button for me. It's a fantastic point, and I probably didn't give community networks the plug that I should have in the presentation, because it is almost a fundamental part of A4I's thinking that, and it gets expressed even better in last year's report around thinking about different sources of capital funding into infrastructure investments. I think that the summary point would be, thinking that only one business model to connect everyone in the world is kind of like trying to cook a dish with only one ingredient. It's just not going to work out really well. So community networks are part of that. And I think one way that we really want to see further change is, in particular, the regulatory environments that exist, not seeing it as one size fits all or one business model is going to solve our problems, but being more welcoming to alternative options such as community networks, but also universal service funds being more open to supporting community network through investment. So it's both kind of the permission aspect of enabling community networks to happen on their own, but also positively supporting them as alternative business models, because it's going to take that diversity of business models to provide universal, affordable and meaningful coverage for everyone. So yes, it's a huge part, and one that I hope at least gets expressed at points in the affordability report, and it should be an essential part of any kind of strong broadband policy environment.
Great. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. I think also what we have to be mindful of is that, part of why we are here as a multi-stakeholder coalition is that there's a role for everyone to play. And certainly, even with community networks, there's still a role for government to have policies that actually enable the creation of community networks. As we've seen, even with the successful ones, there's still some challenges there around enabling policy environment for people to even mobilize community networks for providing the access. There's a few other points around GNI and inequality. And I think, Teddy, you can perhaps just kind of share. I'm not sure if our income calculator is actually available online, but that's one of the great tools that I know you've worked on that I absolutely enjoy using. That at some point we do take a look at this data and separate the population by income quantiles to be able to really get to better understand the affordability conundrum, right? Because rightfully so, if you take a country like South Africa that's got huge inequalities, the points of affordability are going to be different depending on which income quantile each group falls into. So perhaps you can just share a little bit about the calculator that you use.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it is a tool that we have internally within the team. But yeah, we do look at the data. I saw the comment as well. It's a hugely influential factor, and one that we need to make greater priority of in terms of understanding how even countries that will meet the 1 for 2 threshold for large groups in the population, and even sometimes you can have countries that meet at the national level 1 for 2%. But if you break it down into quintiles, the majority of people are not meeting that 1 for 2, that 1 for 2 basis because of income disparities and kind of the concentration of wealth in particularly the top 20% of a country's population. But I think it speaks to a broader point as well, which really thinks about how inequalities within a country, both income, gender, geography, as well as another really influential one, kind of affect the terms of access for individuals. And so in particular, thinking about where those things intersect is a huge and stubborn challenge that we all need to cover. In the Affordability Drivers Index, we think about, one of the indicators we had was focusing on, one of the indicators we measured national broadband plans this year was on rural access and how well those are setting targets. Fortunately, that was the most consistent trend in terms of where governments are setting targets out of the 5 themes we did cover. But I also think it speaks to the fact that it is the most pressing concern globally. And it's kind of one of the most stubborn concerns that no matter what countries, the particularities of different country contexts, and they do exist between countries, the urban-rural divide is a consistent problem for many countries to cover. And one that needs constant kind of refinement and addressing. And also the Affordability Drivers Index does include an indicator around gender responsive policymaking and how well does the policy environment enable affordable access for women and girls. Because yeah, we need to address them, because that is that 49% that remains unconnected are typically those who are living in more remote and urban more remote and rural areas, those on lower incomes, and in particular, women and girls. So closing all of those gaps is important if we're going to reach universal access. Onica, I think you might be muted. Onica, I think you're muted.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Yes. So there's also a question on the chat from Martha with regards to inflation, I believe, and how using the GNI, how are we, let me get it correctly because I don't see Martha anymore. I don't know if you can see the question, Teddy, but she wants to know how, using GNI, how are we controlling for inflation in calculating the 1 for 2, for example?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I would say it's probably an imperfect process from us. So just to explain the way that we calculate 1 for 2 is we every year pull together the various plans for mobile broadband that are offered by the leading mobile network operator, and figure out which ones meet the, basically how many times you might need to buy a plan to meet the volume threshold, or if you just need to buy kind of 1 gig for a month and it's good to go, how much does that cost? Comparing all of those plans, seeing which one is the cheapest, and then taking that number as relative to GNI per capita and the latest available figures in that country for that indicator or for that value. And expressing both of those in terms of, unfortunately, US dollars, because that's where how the data is most available to us to use. But yeah, inflation can affect how that's going to fluctuate over time. Probably something that we need to look at as well as A4II. But that explains a bit of how we calculate 1 for 2 right now.
Great, thank you. I think I'll kind of use this moment to I know we are doing the affordability report here, but there's some other work and reports that really support a lot of what has gone into the affordability report. We have the mobile broadband research that's also available on our website for you to take a look at. Also, that came out earlier this year is the rural broadband framework, the policy framework for rural broadband, which I would encourage you to take a look at. But most importantly, and I think eventually we are going to have this conversation around 1 for 2, as to exactly how much internet and life transforming work can you really do with 1 gig of data, even if it's at below 2%. And hence the important work, Teddy, that you and your team have also done around developing a target for meaningful connectivity is certainly one I would love to draw your attention to. All of those are available on our website. So please do take a look at them and engage through your coalition email lists, and Teddy's email address I think is available there. I will also add it on the chat to explore and talk a little bit more about how do we really get to a point where this connectivity is not just a tick box exercise of saying we've connected this many people for less than 2%, but it is really about connecting them to not only an affordable internet, but one that is meaningful and transformative, especially looking at just the experience. I think Teddy showed us a slide of the number of children who are out of school due to COVID globally, and I'm sure that affects our region quite tremendously as well in terms of their inability to even connect during such a moment. So unless we have any other questions, comments, if someone has a burning question, comment, please quickly unmute yourself. I'm taking a risk here. Unmute yourself and share so we can release Teddy. Comments, questions, comments, going once. Teddy, any closing remarks from you?
Just reading a comment here. I think it's from Hans, if I'm reading the name correctly. Cost side limited protection cost. Yeah, how can, if I'm reading the question correctly, it's kind of how to increase the income of youth. Yeah, how can it be driven to have broadband access be a driver for greater income? And I think that speaks quite fortuitously back to Onica, your comments about meaningful connectivity, and that's kind of the next part of not just seeing affordability as the only indicator that's important, but it is part of kind of a suite of indicators that's going to be really important in terms of thinking about digital economies and digital growth, both socially and economically, is the affordability of connectivity, but also what are people being connected to and what are the qualities of that access in terms of, from our end, we want it to be meaningful access. So that's concerning that's of a robust enough speed that someone can participate on a Zoom call like this. They have access to a higher capacity connection periodically, kind of an oasis effect is what I like to call it, where you can do a bit more than what you might be able to do kind of on a ubiquitous level. And that there's relevant content as well that kind of contributes all into ideally a harmonious cycle that's going to facilitate greater connectivity and kind of the greater relevance of internet access overall for people. But yeah, I guess I can stop there pretty much. Thank you all, everyone, for your feedback, and do reach out. I've left my email in the chat. So yeah, looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Yes, affordable local content that is also locally produced. Thank you very much for that comment, Teddy. Very important. We have one last comment from Kweku, who is the National Coordinator of the Ghana Coalition.
Thank you, Onica, and thank you, Teddy. On behalf of AFRI Ghana Coalition, I want to express our thanks for this wonderful study. And I want to assure AFRI that it is timely as far as Ghana is concerned, because we in Ghana are in the process of developing our digital policy. And the data that is contained will enable us adjust the strategy and the action plan for the implementation of the policy. AFRI has already made a lot of inputs, which to the best of my knowledge, have been considered in the policy proposals now receiving the attention of the Ministry of Communication, especially mainstreaming gender considerations along all the facets of the policy regime. So I want to thank you that the document is very, very useful, and we of AFRI will do our best to ensure that getting the meaningful connectivity that Ghana desires, which has come to the fore following the COVID-19 shortfalls that we had, would actually use the data meaningfully to impact on policy development. Thank you very much, and my regards to the AFRI team and all those who are on the platform.
Great, thanks, Kweku, and thanks to each and every one of you for engaging with this report. I'm looking forward to continuing to see how we actually implement some of the recommendations through the work that is being done with the coalitions. So please keep the communication lines open. We have the coalition email groups, as well as you now also have Teddy's email in case you have any specific questions that you would like to engage with him on. Once again, have a wonderful afternoon, happy holidays, and looking forward to a great 2021. Thank you.